Welcome to our regular meeting of October 17th. Call the meeting to order. I have our Pledge of Allegiance. We have all board members present. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
honor
the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
the public forum. We don't have anyone. I did have a letter that I was asked to read. It's very short. If I understand the agenda item correctly, the district will pay legal counsel to defend athletes who are suspended by UIL. These suspensions are due to transfers for the purpose of playing football for San Marcos. I know for a fact these transfers have happened before in San Marcos. In the case of the student I am familiar with, they were transferred right back to the sending school when football season was over. I, as a taxpayer, do not wish to spend funds for the purpose of supporting students or staff who try to manipulate the system. I am disappointed such an action is even being considered. I hope I have misinterpreted this item. If someone needs to be fined, it seems it should be the athletic department. Signed, Janet Aaron.
Mrs. Cantu,
Yes.
moving forward, it's my understanding that current board policy doesn't dictate or explain in the way in which this board were to read comments submitted to us via email. I know historically there have been some issues where we've received several dozen, if not hundreds, of written responses into our inbox, and I'm just curious what metric or what mechanism do you as chair use to decide when these communications are read in public?
Mostly because it was just the only one I received.
So if it was a dozen or 2 dozen,
I would rethink it. Thank you for asking.
okay.
Can we move on to the next item, which would be proclamation and recognition of SMCISD's participation in Manufacturing Month?
Good evening, Board. Dr. Cardona. I'm CJ Odom, the CT coordinator for the district. I have a representative, Ted Golsky, from the Greater San Marcos Partnership here with us today. They reached out to us. They wanted to take a moment to just thank the board and the school district for some partnerships that we've done with them with some of our CTE programs. So I will let him speak to that, and then we can read the proclamation that they put together for us.
Thanks, CJ. Dr. Cardona, board, thank you for this opportunity. Greater San Marcos Partnership, we're appreciative of you guys choosing to recognize Manufacturing Month. You know, we feel that's one of the pillars in our community, one of our underrepresented factors. And so given this opportunity to expose our students to this, giving them another perspective of what manufacturing is about and its importance to our community. So we appreciate the recognition and the opportunity to represent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So the proclamation that they submitted reads as follows. Whereas San Marcos Consolidated Independent School District, the Greater San Marcos Partnership, Workforce Solutions Rural Capital Area, and the Greater San Marcos Manufacturing Association recognize the economic impact of manufacturing on the region. And whereas San Marcos CISD career and technical education classes include incredible creative opportunities for students to create, design, and explore using the latest technological equipment. And whereas in addition to preparing students for post-secondary education, CTE classes provide learners opportunities to work in a variety of mechanical fields, gaining knowledge and experience in refinery and pipeline systems, robotics, and other critical advanced operations to support local manufacturers in the region. And whereas CTE program staff partner directly with manufacturer leaders to increase awareness and change misconceptions about manufacturing among the emerging workforce and inspire the next generation of creators to consider careers in modern manufacturing. And whereas the manufacturing industry provides 5.7% of jobs in Hays County, and manufacturers will need to hire 4 million workers by 2030, and whereas the current average annual wage in Hays County for careers in manufacturing is $60,754 compared to all other industries at $46,631, And whereas the prosperity of the Central Texas region and the state of Texas depends on the educational and vocational opportunities that align with our manufacturers' skilled labor needs, as well as the continued development of advanced manufacturing capabilities and processes. And whereas San Marcos Consolidated Independent School District Board of Trustees are proud to honor the manufacturers throughout the region and their significant contributions to the students and the community, and appreciate manufacturers opening their doors this semester to host students on a variety of site visits and facility tours. Now therefore be it resolved that the San Marcos CISD Board of Trustees does hereby proclaim October 2022 as Manufacturers Month.
Thank you very much. Next item, closed session, is authorized by Texas Government Code Section 551.071, consultation with legal counsel regarding UIL, DEC, SEC decision, appeal, and possible litigation regarding same. We'll reconvene at 7:11. It's a lucky time.
My favorite?
After much discussion and consideration, there's no action to be taken. We'll move on to the superintendent's report.
Madam President, members of the board, good evening. Well, self-report that I forgot to get with Mrs. Reinhardt to present on attendance, but Mr. Hartley has so graciously volunteered to come up to the podium. There was some questions that was asked about the high school attendance with their schedule. It does create some uniqueness because they have first and fifth period every day, and then they have the other periods every other day. So by state law, your 90% rule would be 10 day, on the 11th day, you would be non-credited, and on your A day, B days, it would be after the fifth absence. The school did recognize that we're still in the middle of an issue with COVID, and so Ms. Reinhardt, I think, and the administrative team made a decision that we will have situations where parents may test at home and keep their children at home, and if they just send that information with the note, they will treat it as if it was a doctor's note, which means it doesn't count against those days. And I think they have a pretty robust recovery plan, but Mr. Hartley can speak more about that. That was, I think, the big issue I think that I heard some people talking about was that change. And it really wasn't a change. It's they're really enforcing the 90%, but it looks different because of that A day, B day modified block something.
Ms. Halsey, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks so much. I received Principal Reinhardt's email with the clarification, and that was super helpful, and I think this all makes a lot of sense. My one question, though, is about the doctor's note requirement. Is that in our student code of conduct, or is that a state requirement? Because I think that it's a little onerous, and in speaking to people at other districts, they don't seem to require that for excuses that fall under the excused absence category.
There's a difference between extenuated, correct, and Rose can correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, so the doctor's note extenuates the absence, which means that, like a funeral, it never happened for the purposes. So parents can write a note and it'll be an excused absence, but it still will go against the 10 days. Yeah. Mr. Hartley.
So all of it is documented in our student parent handbook, and our attendance policy is based off the Texas Education Agency attendance handbook. It's a 280-page document, and it is very clear on the requirements for attendance. All absences, whether excused or unexcused, go towards the 90% rule for credit. So the student could have 100 in the class, but if they don't have the seat time, then they could potentially lose credit. Now, every district is required to have an attendance committee to review all absences, anything that's extenuating circumstances, medical, documented doctor's notes, all of that is considered during that attendance meeting, and students are given credit for that. I don't know if that answered your question, but I can answer more clearly if you have a specific question.
I think that it does answer my question. I think that people generally don't understand that, right? So I don't know if there's a way that we can further educate our high school students, especially about that, so that they can, have ownership of that.
Absolutely. We've had a few sessions, Trustee Halsey, and we have had some Facebook Lives, and there are some recordings out there. We will do another one. We have another one coming up at the beginning of November. I'll make sure it's advertised really well. But you're 100% right. On my conversations daily with families, they do not understand the ramifications for attendance when it comes to credits.
Right, and I know that the Gear Up counselors and Principal Reinhardt have been reinforcing to students that they do have 2 college visit days that they can take, and as long as they get, documentation from the college that they were there, that they took the tour, or whatever, that because those are certainly opportunities that we want to make available to kids, right? And we don't want
Absolutely.
kids coming to school if they're sick. And we know that kids need to get their driver's licenses, and sometimes they can't get to the DMV. The DMV is so booked up for months in advance that you can't get there except during school hours, and we certainly want to make that available, right? So I think that anything that we can do to make that communication more clear with students and parents, that would be great. So.
Absolutely. And while you mentioned driver's license, also based on Texas Education Agency and our handbook, students have to have 90% of attendance to be eligible for their verification of enrollment as well.
Right. I mean, obviously we want kids at school as much as possible. I'm not
Absolutely.
in any way suggesting that students shouldn't be at school, but there are some times when that.
And all of those will be considered during that attendance case manager. I think communication is key from the family, so sending the notices if there is a funeral, if they are sick, those type of things will absolutely help.
And I think we filmed, or you did a podcast on attendance?
We did, yes.
So that
Great.
that was one of our topics with the fentanyl. So we'll be sending that out to the families.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
So you did great, Mr. Hartley.
Thank you.
Good job.
Is there anything else?
You were very eloquent and polished. You did awesome.
Thank you.
You're gonna be embarrassed.
Mr. Hartley will get me back at some point. He will. He's not afraid to.
Next, we'll go on to reports, information items, academic update.
Dr. Valadez will give us a bilingual update.
Good evening, President Cantu, Dr. Cardona, and Board of Trustees. My name is Monica Valadez. I am the Director of Elementary CNI and Bilingual and ESL Education. And this is our annual presentation of our bilingual ESL program, year in review from 21-22. So let me just to the first page. All right. So we have these program types here in San Marcos CISD. As we know, we no longer offer the transitional program. We offer dual language for our bilingual classrooms. That's a one-way or a two-way model. Most of our classrooms are a two-way model, meaning that we have Spanish proficient students in the classroom and English proficient students in the classroom learning together. We do have a couple of classrooms at Bonham that are one-way, which means only our EB students are in there, and that's just because of the number of EB students that are enrolled this year. We didn't have sufficient space, because we only have 4 classrooms, to put additional English proficient students that had applied to the program. If that makes sense, since we only have 4, we really need those rooms for our EB students, because that is their program. That is kind of like their mainstream, so we needed to reserve those seats. We do have 2 classrooms there that are two-way. Then we also have ESL content-based. That is across the board from pre-K all the way through 12th grade. And we have ESL pull-out, and that is really our secondary campuses. This is just an overview of each program. Y'all have it there in your notes. I'm sure y'all read through them. Two-way again, 2 populations of students, the English proficient and Spanish proficient students learning both English and Spanish together. The one-way, only our emerging bilingual students are in that classroom. The ESL content-based means that the teacher is ESL certified and is not departmentalized. They're self-contained. They teach all of the content areas: social studies, science, math, and language arts. And then the pull-out is only the ELAR teacher is certified. The other content areas, the teacher might not be ESL certified. And that you mostly see in our secondary campuses. So staffing, last year we did several. We did online UTRGV, job fair and recruitment for our bilingual and ESL certified staff. Texas State University, we had one in person in the fall, UT at Kingsville, UTEP, and then also we had our SMCISD in person job fair. For stipends, as you all know, last year we were at $4,000 for our bilingual certified teachers that serve in the dual language program, and you all have graciously raised that to $6,000 for the 22-23 school year. Our ESL certified staff, and those are staff members that work with our newcomer students. That's at the secondary level. They are the teachers that teach our newcomers the English proficiency. They do the ELD, the English language development courses, when they first arrive to our public schools. And so those teachers get a $1,500 stipend. There's one at each of our secondary campuses. And then there's supposed to be two. There's a job posting for our high school. And then the LPAC chair, they receive a $500 stipend. So the LPAC chair is really one of the main people in the LPAC committee. There's the LPAC administrator chair, and then a parent rep that sits on the LPAC. And the LPAC really is monitors and identifies our EB students, make sure they're doing well, reviews their folders at the end of the school year, and identifies them at the beginning or really all year long as they come to us. Bilingual exceptions and TEA waivers, we don't have any exceptions. Exceptions would be for bilingual staff that are teaching in the dual language program that are not bilingual certified. We would ask for an exception. We don't have any of those. All of our bilingual teachers in dual language are certified appropriately. The waiver is for ESL. So if the teacher is teaching ELAR, English Language Arts and Reading, and is not certified ESL and has an EB student that is in ESL programming, then we would ask for a waiver. This year we're asking for 14 waivers from TEA for those teachers, and I'll give you a little bit idea in terms of our plan for addressing that. Level of intervention, last year we had this level of intervention. This was the results-driven accountability, and so in mathematics 3 to 8, algebra 1, biology, we were at performance level needs intervention, so we worked along with TEA partner, created an intervention plan, and started implementing that intervention plan. Really, it was highly around the structured conversation and making sure that all of our teachers, regardless of the content that they teach, begin to develop the persona that they're language teachers, right? So if you're a biology teacher, if you're a math teacher, if you're, of course, a language teacher, you're teaching language first, and then, of course, content, because our students need to be able to listen, understand the language of the discipline. They need to be able to speak to it, they need to be able to read it, and they need to be able to write it. So really the focus is now turned on, let's make sure that our teachers are language teachers, and then also, of course, deliver the content if it's different than language, biology, et cetera. A review of our professional developments over the course of last year. So as you see, we had several professional development opportunities, and then the number of staff that participated, along with our ESL instructional coach, David Coronado, who really hit up the 7 steps to language-rich intervention interactive classroom, making sure that all of our campuses were trained and all of our teachers begin to understand that there are certain unique strategies that are not difficult to implement that really help our students develop the listening ear for English and begin to develop the speaking component as well. In TELPAS, really that's across the state, the two that hit us the biggest, which is the listening and the speaking. So really developing that ear for English, especially as they get into and roll into our campuses later in their school years. But some of the results really that came from it, this year we're implementing structured conversation as one of our instructional keys, and that's not only within our dual language program, ESL program, that's across the board. We're working with 3 instructional keys, and that's writing, that's structured conversations, and then that's levels of questioning to increase the rigor. So we're working that not only again within our dual language bilingual program, but across the district to really hit up on those instructional keys that are high impact. And then really an increase in the awareness and requests for ESL Academy. So ESL Academy is one of the ways that we help our teachers who are on a waiver make sure that they're certified by the end of the school year. That is a self-paced course, but then we're making it a little bit more interactive this year, and we're gonna do some in-person sessions with our teachers that are on a waiver. Mr. Coronado also visits them in their classroom to help support them implementing those strategies that are a benefit to our EB students. But we've also, because of the ESL Academy, we have teachers that are asking us if they can also access the ESL Academy that aren't on a waiver that would like to become ESL certified. So we're increasing that awareness that teachers, it's important for them to be ESL certified regardless of what they teach. So that's a good thing. And then the increased fidelity to practices aligned to dual language model. So shifting away from the transitional model, right, that we transition kids from speaking Spanish to speaking English, to really adopting the dual language and understanding that it's about bilingualism. And so we're not trying to transition kids away from any language, we're trying to double their language. TELPAS results, 2 of them did not count towards accountability, and that's just numbers of students that were there. There are a small population of EBs on those campuses. But then we have the middle schools and the high school and one of our elementary campuses, Travis, that will need additional support to make sure, again, we're doing the structured conversations. I think that will help us really build that momentum that we've already started to build from the last couple of years. So numbers of students reclassified. These are students that met the criteria through TELPAS and the STAR reading to exit from EB status, so they're on monitor year 1. Parent and family student engagement through bilingual education. We have Title III funds. Family and student engagement is a big component of that. And so we can see the different areas that we prepared for not only the students, but also the parents to engage in a different way of approaching, one, understanding dual language specifically. We still have some parents that will, Spanish-speaking parents that want to choose the ESL, but we know research indicates that bilingualism is actually a lot stronger for them. The longer their children are in bilingual education, the better they'll do in secondary campuses. So just a few of the things that we did with our students and parents. Additional resources and support for 22-23. We all know that this year we don't have different curriculum resources in our classrooms. So dual language and mainstream both have Amplify. So we're both implementing Amplify. Of course, Amplify in Spanish for our dual language students, Amplify in English for mainstream. But we also have Eureka in Spanish and English. So this year, more than any other year, we're really aligned in the resources that we're utilizing. So that improves the planning between our mainstream and our dual language teachers. And it helps us coordinate professional development as well. For example, on October 31st, which is our PD day, we have all our elementary teachers, both dual language that are teaching SLAR and our mainstream that are teaching ELAR. They're coming to a professional development that will include Amplify and Eureka. So they're all receiving the same professional development. We have blended coaching, so we're partnered with Region 13 this year, and they are training our coaches. So that includes our district level coaches and our campus level coaches, so that they understand what coaching, like the coaching model that we want to implement. And as we have been learning, and I think we all kind of knew it, coaching is what makes the difference within the classroom to improve the implementation of those strategies, right? So theory isn't enough, professional development isn't enough. What research shows is that you need the theory, you need the training, you need the modeling, but then you need the coaching. And the coaching actually increases that implementation of those strategies like 75 to 90%. Where the others, if you just leave it at the level of training or the level of training and modeling, that's about 5%. That those strategies are actually going to be implemented with fidelity within the classroom. So the coaching component becomes really important. We do have LPAC specialists this year that they really are supporting our campuses in really developing those, that awareness of the need for LPAC and the importance that that committee plays, because they start the ball rolling in terms of our EB support, because they identify our students who are emerging bilinguals, they provide the accommodations, they make sure the teachers are following those accommodations, they pay attention to those grade reports, so they're helping us align all of those practices across the district. And then just some celebrations from 21-22. This is just a few of the images, but we had a really good representation across the year from Dr. Celaya coming and training a cohort of teachers to increase their understanding of trauma-informed education, especially around our newcomers, because we have a lot of newcomers that come from our detention centers on the border. They're being reunited with family here in the area, and so we had that cohort that that was trained by Dr. Celaya over the course of 4 sessions, Saturdays as well, all the way to our tri-district leadership with Seguin and Lockhart to build the awareness of dual language as well, because they do dual language, and to really build that awareness, because it really takes a long time to shift away from transitional models, since we're kind of deeply ingrained in it. We've been doing it for so long that we really need to break those old models, and sometimes it takes a little bit of time. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Very good report, Dr. Valadez.
Thank
Questions?
you. Yeah, I had a question. Can you go back to the waivers and just explain why we have so many more this year? I think I know the answer, but making assumptions?
So there's different reasons. Some of it means that teachers who may became ESL certified are no longer here. They moved on. We had new ones come in and they didn't have ESL certification. The universities are now requiring that as part of their graduation plan, and so they automatically, since they know it's so needed, automatically put that in as part of the expectation. But our teachers that have several years in, veteran teachers, even teachers that are 3-4 years only in the field, they never had that expectation. So if they were working in a district that didn't have that expectation, they're coming to us. They might not have it, but again, it's kind of like the need. So it seems like every year we need about this many waivers. We're hoping to retain teachers and incentivize teachers. So we're working with Mr. Sanders and Mr. Mitchell to try and figure out how to incentivize teachers to want to become ESL certified so we can offer more content-based instead of ESL pull-out, which means we're certifying our biology teacher, our math teacher, our ELAR teacher as well.
And these teachers are required to be in your ESL academy?
Yes, ma'am.
And you said you've opened that up to other teachers who aren't required who are participating?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yes, but we're making, one of the changes is we're making the ESL, although it's still gonna be self-paced, we're gonna have certain key points where we're bringing them together in person so that they are cognizant, aware of where they are. So the first thing that we have them do is take a pre-test to see if they might already be ready to go ahead and sign up for a test. So if they get 80% on the practice test, we encourage them to go ahead and sign up and take the test because they're more likely going to pass the test. If they don't, then we go through the self-paced course with them.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Arredondo?
Thank you, President Cantu. Dr. Valadez, thank you so much for this evening's presentation. It communicates so accurately what I've known being in the schools, and it's that our dual language and bilingual program is so much more than teaching Spanish-speaking students English or English-speaking students Spanish, right? There's a litany of services that I would argue are wraparound services to a historically underserved or underrepresented population of students. So thank you so much for this evening's presentation. My one and only question is, and I apologize if it was in the presentation and I missed it, do we have a certain or like a data set of what our cohort size currently is when it comes to like our dual language program? And the only reason why I ask that is when this program was presented to us by Dr. Cardona and the administration, it was, you know, one day we hope to see, you know, dozens, if not hundreds of students at San Marcos High School testing out of like AP Spanish 4, right? And going on to college with college credit in this language. So is there a way that we're tracking that the cohort size stays consistent and that we're staffing adequately in future years when it comes to like middle school, high school, et cetera? Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, that's really difficult, especially since we do lack in that area in terms of bilingual certified teachers. So, and that's a huge problem in the state of Texas, I would gather to say across the country in terms of finding those teachers. But what we're doing right now is building the capacity, one, of the teachers to want to be dual language teachers, and of course the increase in the stipend is helping significantly, so for retention purposes, so that's fantastic. Right now we have about 730 something total students that are in dual language pre-K to 5. Out of that, about 31% of those are English proficient students. We graduated a big cohort from 5th grade last year, and those were our first year students, the ones that initiated the program here in the district in 2017, 2018. They moved on to 6th grade this year. And so those students had a choice to enroll in one of their electives, discovering world languages and cultures. And so we have our LOT teacher at Goodnight that is teaching 2 sections, and our LOT teacher at Hernandez that is teaching a section where those students are enrolled. And so the goal is to build the awareness on the part of the parent that bilingualism has to be a very deliberate choice, right? Because you have so many choices going into middle school, right? You have athletics, you have band, you have choir, you have theater, and you have to know that bilingualism is just as critical and important, and the family has to decide which one they would prefer, because some families feel like we're taking away an elective, and we're not really taking away an elective, we're offering them, right? So I think sometimes it's that mindset as well. But yes, our goal is to continue building the program. Right now, we don't have sufficient bilingual certified teachers at secondary to do the pathway has to be 2 courses per grade level. Right now, we only have 1 course, and that's through the LOAT program. But we're hoping to extend that next year for the students to take Spanish 1 specifically for them, dual language, and then Spanish 2 specifically for them in 8th grade.
Wonderful, and I thank you so much for sharing that challenge, because I agree with you. I think it's not just a San Marcos issue, it's a state and national issue. And I would be interested, Madam President, Dr. Cardona, if that is a conversation when it comes to the drafting of next year's fiscal budget, of what that looks like, making adequate investments, because I've attended the bilingual programming that y'all have put on at the elementary level, and I see children just doing super impressive, amazing things at such a young age. And I would hate to see that, you know, we have that investment at an elementary level, and that this board has been so intentional about investing at that level, and then it kind of going off a cliff because of the challenges when it comes to staffing and making sure that we have adequate secondary facilitators and educators. And so if that is a conversation about money or resources, I would like to have that now, Dr. Cardona, or not now, but sooner rather than later, so that this board can have a conversation about that. Because again, it was my hope or my expectation, or at least the way that this program was sold to us, is that eventually it would grow to this K-12 system. And so I'd like to know where that is and what we can do to support those efforts. So thank you again,
Absolutely.
Dr.
Thank you.
Valadez.
Absolutely. And that might lead us, if I may, that might lead us to the conversation around bilingual exceptions, like larger districts that also want to continue to promote the dual language all the way through 12th grade. Often what they do is they inventory their middle school and high school teachers to see who are bilingual, maybe not bilingual certified, but bilingual, they speak the Spanish language, and then ask for exceptions during that year while they're attaining the bilingual certification. It is more difficult than the ESL certification, but it's possible.
Perfect, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ms. Halsey?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you personally, Dr. Valadez, because I think that this program is a huge success for the district, and I think it's thriving, and I think the opportunities for growth are a testament to how well you have implemented it, honestly. And I know parents who have students enrolled in the program from Bonham to now at the middle school level, and I hear parents and staff members who are associated with the program speak only in the greatest enthusiasms and so highly and so to your credit. And so I really appreciate how much you have personally invested into making sure that this program has been implemented with fidelity and with integrity, and thank you.
Absolutely, thank you so much. We get a lot of our feedback from Facebook, so I'll get comments like, somebody made this okay, let's call that parent. So they help
Done a
us
great
out by
job.
asking questions, so thank you.
Yeah,
Fando?
thank you.
I want to reiterate what Ann just said. Ms. Cantu and I had the pleasure of attending the Bonham in-the-school program. I was blown away. Here's these little ones reading English and reading Spanish, and I'm going like, they're only how old at Bonham?
Mm-hmm.
And so it was really impressive to me. And then I think that I don't think that all of the students could do that, but those that could, I think will encourage the other ones to follow up. If they don't know English, then they'll learn it. If they don't know Spanish, then they'll learn it.
Absolutely.
The program was very well attended, and I'm glad that we got to go.
We went.
And I don't know if you have anything to
Musical
add,
program.
but
It was a great program.
It's all from this larger than life program that you're doing.
Absolutely. If y'all ever want to visit classrooms, just let me know.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great report. Next.
Ms. Hart?
Presentation from Anela.
Good evening, Board President Cantu, Board, Dr. Cardona. Gonna do my presentation? Is it on? No, I don't know. Oh, there it is. President. Thank you. Oh, thank you for giving me the opportunity to present to you tonight. The first thing I would like to review with you is our 2022 STAR assessment data, and this is our data for all subjects, for all students. Just an area of highlight, we did see an increase of student performance across the board in the reading category. Some of our focus areas at Miller are going to be, of course, Tier 1 instruction, professional development, and campus culture. The big rocks of of our Tier 1 instruction is going to be blended learning and station rotation. We were able to work with the Office of Academics, who helped us receive high-quality instructional materials for in STEM scopes. I know that says illustrative math, but we moved on to STEM scopes in math, as well as McGraw-Hill in reading and language arts. And one of the things that we're excited about is within the first 3 or so weeks of school, what we noticed was that our teachers were putting a lot of work and effort into their planning and really looking through a lot of resources. But one of the benefits of high quality instructional materials is the teachers are able to move from creating lessons to internalizing lessons, because groups of experts have already put together the materials that the students need, and all of these have been proven to be research-based and proven to work with students. So we're really excited to have those. In order to ensure quality assurance of the high quality instructional materials, the administrative team as well as the instructional coaches have been working on observation and feedback cycles for our teachers, and we're able to provide that within our new schedule, where we focus on teacher development for the first 45 minutes of school. So one of those days we set aside for observation and feedback for our teachers on the week before the lessons and how they presented them to their students. In professional development, we've been able to partner with Transcend, who has been extremely instrumental in helping us with our blended learning station rotations and the implementation of our high quality instructional materials. I've been able to learn a lot from them. They're a very, very good thought partner. And for our students who are in our intervention classes, one of the things that we're doing is implement and amplify as well as XIII. But with the high quality instructional materials and STEM scopes, one of the things I was extremely excited about is that the students also have the opportunity to be able to use that resource within their intervention classes as well as intervention outside of school. With the addition of Eduphoria, we've been able to really drill down on the data that we're using to inform our instruction. So on Tuesdays and Thursdays, those teachers are in professional learning communities where we're focused on the student data. So one of the ways we improve this year is not looking at large chunks of data, meaning our CBAs as well as our MAP scores. Of course, we still include that. However, with the addition of formative assessments that we've been able to use in Eduphoria, we have real data just in time to be able to respond to student need in the classroom on a weekly basis. When it comes to campus culture, we have really put in a lot of effort in streamlining our routines and procedures across campus with the implementation of CHAMPS, which is our behavior management system for our students, as well as PBIS, which is our positive behavior supports for our students. and ensuring that in each grade level, we've been able to give teachers the flexibility of being able to celebrate our students, because we want to focus more on what we want to see. So if we want to see students who are thriving, who feel connected to the campus, who are having a positive experience, then we want to celebrate those things. And what we've been able to see is by celebrating positive, we have had a decrease in the number of behaviors that we've seen on our campus. We were able to have absolutely no students in ISS for the first 3 weeks of school. So I think that approach with PBIS has been extremely helpful to our students. Also, one of the things that you'll see coming up soon is with our students for incentives as well as our teachers, we're going to be having a breakfast of champions. All of you are invited to come out, and this is one of the ways that we want to reward our students who are performing well academically, and their teachers have actually identified them as being stellar students. So a large chunk of them will be for academic performance, but we know that all students aren't there yet, so we're looking for other ways to be able to celebrate all of our students for incremental change throughout the school year. So how are we getting there? Some of these things I've already gone over with you. For all of our core teachers, we're going to be focusing on those high leverage instructional strategies that they're using in the classroom. Of course, again, blended learning and station rotation. However, with formative assessments, they can be taken in more than one way. So we are working with our teachers to look at like total participation techniques so that they're able to gauge student learning throughout the lesson and make those adjustments that they need to make. Teachers are also receiving relevant professional development, and what that means is as we're doing our observation and feedback cycles, there are things that we're able to see. For instance, one of the things that we're focusing on is a strong start. So how the teacher starts and how they start the class. Are the students, is a bell ringer provided for the students? Is that done within the first 10 minutes of class? Have we given students the proper instruction of what is necessary for them? What should their Chromebooks be? What should my technology look like? So we want to make sure that students are set up for success within the first few minutes of class. And what we've seen is by doing that, it's brought down fewer behavior concerns inside of the classroom. Also, inside of the class, we have different visuals to support that with our students. The campus leaders are also working to cultivate and maintain a positive campus through establishing campus routines and procedures. But I think that one of the things that's truly helping us this year is our teacher, student, and parent surveys. That's one of the ways that we have been able to collect feedback not only from our students but also our parents and be able to make adjustments. We do this year have campus instructional coaches who, like Dr. Volladay has said, is able to go in and help the teachers continue to grow and improve their practice. Thank you so much for listening. Yes, sir.
Thank you so much, President Cantu. Thank you so much, Principal Hart. I appreciate you explaining at a campus level what is being done to support students and staff. Could you explain to me what type of supports you're getting from central office and the Office of Academics to support students and staff as well?
Absolutely. So every week, the instructional specialists are on campus. Their support looks different depending on the content and how they're working with the teachers. We also have Dr. Block, who meets with me twice a week because, of course, the campus is not rated. And so we're really working to strengthen our instructional practices to make sure that we're meeting the student needs. And we have some great needs on the campus. And so as we're working together, I'm sure that the Office of Academics is strengthening their support as they begin to come and do their observation and feedback as well on the campus to adjust to some of the concerns that they're seeing on the campus.
So when you say that Dr. Block goes about 2 times a week and that the instructional specialists go weekly, once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week, what is the frequency of the instructional specialists visiting your campus and supporting teachers?
I would say we see reading and language arts the most at about 3 times a week. And I mean, that's where we're seeing a large number of growth in our teachers. I would say the instruction in the classroom for reading has changed tremendously, and I think that it's really a result of the amount of support that the teachers are receiving. Our science is there about once a week as well. All of our science teachers are new, as well as the curriculum of STEM scopes. It took a little bit of adjustment for them to really learn what that curriculum looks like, because it's all online based, right? But having Glenda there to support the teachers, they're beginning to gel, but it has taken some time in order for everybody to come together to really understand what those expectations are. Of course, in math, we continue to see challenges, right? That's the area where we have the most concern for our students. And I think that as we continue to work together, we may be able to reach out to some other consultants to bring more knowledge about math into the building, because I think that that's needed at this time. I'm excited about the new program STEM scopes. And through professional development, I think that there's more opportunities out there for our teachers, and we're definitely looking into those.
So based on your comments, there's been a measurable improvement when these instructional specialists in certain core subject areas are on campus and supporting teachers. But you mentioned math. So is there a math, Mr. Sanders, is there a math instructional specialist, and what frequency do they go to Miller at this time?
So we do have a district math specialist, Ms. Wendy Zeiger, who's currently in that role, and she's there multiple times a week. In addition to that, we have a collaborative that we form in the Office of Academics, which consists of Principal Hart, myself, the Director of Curriculum Instruction, the Executive Director of Schools, and so we meet also to problem solve, if you will, what the instruction should look like. When we made the transition to STEM math, that was one of the processes that we used by getting feedback from teachers and such, and being able to determine how we would move from illustrative math to STEM scopes math. It was a group that comes together. So although certain individuals may have a more hands-on role of going into the classroom and actually observing and coaching, we all do collaborative walks together in support of the campus.
Okay, and I appreciate that clarification and that additional information. I guess for me, from the high level in which I sit, I know that we had significant turnover at Miller Middle School since last academic year. And there were members of this board that were concerned at that mass exodus of staff, and that there were other members who saw it as an opportunity to change the course of the campus from what challenges might have existed historically. So I'm, I guess, curious, concerned of like what professional development or what training has taken place for all of those new employees, not only to the profession itself, but to the ISD in particular, with the understanding that we have a brand new math curriculum as well. So I think it's like a trifecta of new in this system, and so I'm individually, concerned, interested in knowing like what we're doing to support those new teachers in addition to it being a new math curriculum.
As far as our new teachers go, what I can tell everyone is on October 25th and 26th, we will have a continuation of our New Teacher Academy. So I'm sure you all are familiar with when we start the school year, we bring all our new teachers in a week early to get some professional development. Typically what happens is that's not something that continues throughout the year, and we as a district, we've recognized that when we're talking about new teachers, we do need to provide a continuation of support throughout the year. And no, October 25th will be all of our new elementary teachers will come together, and then on October 26th will be all of our secondary teachers. And they are divided up between, we have some teachers who, would qualify as our truly beginning teachers, 0 years of experience. Then we have teachers who are within that 1 to 3 years, and then teachers who are new to San Marcos CISD, where it's more of just building the background of how we do things in the district. So this will be something new that we haven't done in years past. Last year there were opportunities, I think twice, where we pulled them after school, but let's just be honest with that. Teachers are tired after they worked all day. So we are committed to doing this twice a year, once in the fall, once in the spring. We will be hitting on timely information in addition to content. We know report cards, how to conduct teacher-parent conferences, all the little things that are huge that new teachers need some support with. Those will be the type of things we'll be working with them on October 25th and 26th.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that additional information. And I've shared this with Dr. Cardona, so I don't think this will be a surprise to him. I have heard from teachers directly, in particular at the middle school level, who do feel like that they are extremely unfamiliar with the new math curriculum and that they have not received adequate professional development to implement the new curriculum with fidelity and in a way that is going to be beneficial to students. In that same vein, and I've told this to Dr. Cardona as well, is that they are extremely excited about the new curriculum and the possibility that it has to impact students in a positive way and to move the needle academically. But again, the kind of overwhelming consensus from the 3 or 4 employees who reached out to me was, we just don't know how to implement it correctly. And so I don't know if that's additional PD days. I don't know if that's funds allocated from the school board to allow those facilitators of that curriculum to come into San Marcos, but I just want to make that concern of mine public. So if in 6 to 8 months we have this conversation and it comes up, well, we didn't have enough time to, teach the employees how to roll out this curriculum. I just wanted on the record to say, like, I brought it up this evening. So I'm curious to know, your feedback or your insight on that. Is, have there been adequate opportunities for staff to get trained in this new curriculum, in the, highly effective materials, the consumables?
HQIMs, the
Yeah.
high quality instructional materials.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, what I will say is the rollout for STEM Scopes Math is something that just recently happened. We started off with illustrative math, and we, based on the feedback and observations that we saw, that illustrative math was not the direction that we were wanting to go. And so STEM Scope Math, just to reiterate the point that Ms. Hart made, it did allow for teachers not to have to spend as much time in the planning process of pulling different materials. And although it was aligned to our TEKS, it was not perfectly aligned to the TEKS, and it did not necessarily follow our scope and sequence in terms of when we gave assessments and such. So our teachers were having to spend additional time on that. And as a result of that, they were not necessarily able to spend the time to actually perfect the lessons. And so with the STEM Scopes Math, there's a better alignment. What we will do is on October 31st, that's our district-wide professional development day, we will have an opportunity to really dive deep down into STEM scopes. As part of securing STEM scopes, we did purchase professional development that's included in the package so that teachers will have that opportunity to get additional PD. Next Tuesday, we will start instructional rounds at both middle schools where we're all going to be learning together. It's important for everyone to understand when we go into schools, it's not about us just observing, giving feedback. It's really learning alongside teachers. So we'll start that process next Tuesday. We'll be at Miller at Goodnight from 8:30 to 11:30, then from 12:30 to 3:30 we'll be at Miller, and the focus of that is strictly math classrooms to really be able to dive in and see what teachers are doing and for us to all learn together with the new math curriculum.
I appreciate, Dr. Sanders, I appreciate the agility that the academics office has shown in transitioning from a curriculum that wasn't working and taking that feedback from your teachers to a new one, and I'm sure that presents a lot of challenges. But I think that kind of agility, it really benefits our students when professionals recognize that the materials aren't working for them. And I also wanted to tell Principal Hart that I very much appreciate the fidelity of the Miller Minute. And as a parent, I read it every week, and I appreciate how faithfully you give that information to families. So thank you for that communication.
Policy, you had your hand
Mr. Arredondo can finish.
Yeah, so my last comment, Mr. Sanders, in regards to both of our unrated campuses is going into our November and December board meetings, and as we wrap up the fall semester, I'm very interested in being more knowledgeable about how central office and the Office of Academics is supporting both of our middle schools. Obviously, we're asking both campus leaders and just the campuses in general to, undertake a very heavy lift to get both schools to where we want them to be moving forward. And so I just want to know, as a system, how we're supporting both of those institutions, and if there's any opportunity for this board to provide additional support.
So we've started what is going to be the academic strategic plan. As part of that plan, it is a collaborative approach where we're looking at different areas. So for example, special education is a huge part of it. We use every different area that is led by someone within the academics department. And during our Monday meetings, we have our team meeting, and during those meetings, we outline what supports are needed for a particular area of the campus. For example, if either Miller or Goodnight, for example, they might be experiencing great success when it comes to ELA, but maybe they're struggling with science because we have new teachers and such. So as part of that discussion, we do have our directors all in the room. Curriculum instruction is there, led by our director of C&I. And so we're able to, in the minute, decide, what supports can we offer. But the thing that's most important is that we're not deciding what the campuses need. We reach out to the principals to get them to share, hey, what are you seeing that we can help out with? Because we don't want us to come up with a plan that doesn't fit the needs of the campus. So it is important that there's great collaboration. And we talked multiple times today. I'm sure Mrs. Hart and Mr. Alvarez probably gets tired of hearing from me and Dr. Block, but it's a way for us to stay in touch with what their needs on the campus are, and for us not to make assumptions about what we feel they need. It's important for that two-way communication to take place.
Wonderful, thank you. And then my last comment is, and this was brought up because of the executive session item that we had earlier in this evening by a couple of community members who asked me directly, were we going to spend money on litigation when we should be focused on academics? And I agree with them that we should be focused on all things for all of our students. So as of right now, when a campus requests additional professional development or additional training, is that something that is historically approved, or is there like a funding challenge there? I guess just looking back, I want to make sure that funding, financial support isn't a hindrance to additional professional development or training for staff. So can you explain that process to me?
Typically it's not, but what I will say is we do look at what professional development campuses are trying to secure to make sure it's in alignment with what the district has prioritized in terms of programs and resources that we're using. So for example, there was a substantial investment made in elementary for our reading and math programs using Amplify and Eureka this year. So the expectation is that we would not then approve of campuses to be going in a different direction using a resource that does not fit with those two. However, when campuses, make a compelling case, we are certainly not the no police. We want them to be able to, if they have it in their campus improvement plan and it's something that they can stress as bringing value to their campus, we're not going to tell them no, but we do ask a series of questions to make sure that the alignment is there, because we don't want to find ourselves in a position where we're trying to support so many programs that are not consistent across the district.
And I appreciate that clarification, and honestly it was kind of a rhetorical question, because in my conversations with you and Dr. Cardona, I think the overwhelming message is if it's good for teachers, it's probably good for students, so we're going to support that effort and that energy. And I don't know if there's just like a disconnect or like a misperception or of like how we make decisions up here, But I know even talking to, sponsors of extracurriculars or even academic clubs, it's, oh, well, we know that the district doesn't have money to do that. And if you look at our coffers, we definitely have the money to do that. So I just want to make sure that that message is being communicated with all campus leaders, with all department chairs across the board, that if it is beneficial and is justifiable, that, this organization or even this board can find the funds to support that. So thank you.
Ms. Halsey?
Ms. Hart, Mr. Sanders, I have a question for you, so please don't go very far. Ms. Hart, though, I agree with Dr. Salmi about the Miller Minute, and I think that's great. And also, as a parent of a student at Miller, I want to say thank you, because I feel like there has been a noticeable culture shift on that campus, and that the school year has really started out in a very positive way. For students and for teachers and for parents, and I've talked to many parents and teachers and students, and the feedback is very positive, and so I think that is important, and I appreciate that work that has gone into making that happen. Mr. Sanders, though, I also agree with Dr. Salmi that I think it's great that we're being flexible and agile and responding to teachers' concerns, but I feel like I missed something, so I just want to clarify. So I thought the school district adopted a new math curriculum last spring, right? And are you saying that then we started that math curriculum and we used that for about 6 weeks, and then we changed and we've now adopted a new math curriculum that we're implementing?
So yes, the illustrative math was the direction that we were planning to go based on a different program that we were looking at down the road, but knowing that our immediate need is not down the road. We can't worry about 2026. We've got to focus on this year. And illustrative math just was not getting us to the place where there was a comfort level with our teachers to be able to implement at the level that's needed to get our kids mastering the grade level content. And this was something that was noticed early on, and we wanted to make the move as soon as possible, and we were fortunate that this move would not be hindered by waiting on textbooks to arrive, and we were able just to instantly do this. Something of note quickly on that, over the summer, or actually it was last spring, we were having the discussion, we went back and forth whether we were going to use illustrative math or STEM scopes math. So we did kind of have a dual debate going about which one we were going to use, and illustrative math won out at the time because of our thoughts down the road. But STEM scopes math was always something that we did have in mind, and we did have teacher input along the way. So when we made the switch, it was something that we were not just, it was something new and foreign to us. It was also, it's been used in the district for science for years, and so that was why we felt comfortable moving to it when we did.
Okay, and then what grades is that for then?
For all grades.
K through 12?
No, I'm sorry, middle school grades, 6th, 7th, and 8th.
They're using the stem cells math. Great, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Can I request a brief break?
Yes, as soon as he makes one statement, then we're gonna, I'm ready to call for a break.
The next item really isn't a presentation, it's something we sent to y'all.
Just a comment.
It's just the Board of Trustees Master, so y'all have that report, so there's no presentation.
Can we come back at 8:15, Clem?
I've got 8:09, we can come back at 8:15. Calling for a break right now. It is 8:09. Sorry. We're ready for finance report.
Oh, no, we're good.
Yeah.
8:16.
Saved her.
The Inquisition.
He went home.
Madam President, are we doing?
We're doing recapture.
Caught up.
It's an excellent report.
Good evening, Board of Trustees. Tonight, I invited Josh Haney with Moat Casey to come give an update on the introduction to recapture and help us better understand where we stand as a district and as we move forward with this process. So I'll turn it over to Josh.
Thanks, Mike. My name is Josh Haney. I'm with Moat Casey. We're a school finance and accountability consulting company out of Austin. I feel like Mike did put me in a tricky spot. We heard all these great things going on on the academic side, and then I get to come tell you how the state's going to come take your money. So thank you for that, for that lead up. Appreciate it.
Sorry. President Cantu, is there anybody from the city of San Marcos here for the presentation?
They're not. Miss Reyes had family duties, but she's watching right now.
Terrific.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, so I'll just launch into it, rip the Band-Aid off, give you all the bad news. The first couple slides are just a very high-level overview of the school finance system here in Texas. The analogy I give when I'm explaining this, how this works to people, I say in state law, there's this complicated series of formulas and allotments. All that really does is decide how big of a bucket you get, right? That bucket is determined by what's called the Foundation School Program. And then generally speaking, more students, more attendance means a bigger bucket. More participation in some of the programs that we heard from this evening, like dual language, CTE, those can increase your funding, increase your allotments, increase the size of your bucket. Increasing your tax rate, generally speaking, also increases the size of your bucket. And so once all of your students are counted, your tax rate's adopted, all that stuff, all the dust settles on that, and we know how much funding your district is entitled to. The next step is to pour in local funds, okay? And that's determined based on your district's property values as verified by the controller, and that goes into how much of your entitlement will be funded locally. And so exactly where that state, where the state draws that line, the technical name for that is local fund assignment. Again, that's based on the values as determined by the state controller. If there's any room left in that bucket, the state fills it with state aid. But for some districts across the state, the local funds fill up the bucket and some spills out, right? The amount that spills out is called recapture, and that has to be sent back to the state. And then the state uses this to fund the entitlements of other school districts. So recapture districts still receive some state aid. The biggest example is going to be the available school fund. All districts in the state are constitutionally sort of mandated to receive the available school fund. You can see that we're projecting for the 22-23 school year that San Marcos will receive about $4.6 million through the available school fund. And then you also receive some state aid through various other allotments. Tier 2, which is tied to the certain number of pennies that you levy on your tax rate. We're expecting y'all to draw down about $1.2 million in state aid through the golden pennies as part of your tax rate. And so that, again, those come from the first 6 pennies, the first 6 pennies that you guys have adopted in Tier 2. And I'm going to go through a little bit of vocab here since I'm kind of dropping some school finance jargon on y'all, just to make sure you understand exactly what I'm talking about with regards to your tax rate. I think the last time I was here, actually, you guys adopted your M&O property tax rate. What you did is you adopted a tax rate that included different tiers and different levels. I think we touched on that a little bit last time, or Mike did. But just to reiterate that and make sure you guys are understanding the vocabulary I'll use later on, here's how that tax rate's broken out. The first portion is Tier 1. That was $1 prior to House Bill 3. You guys have seen some tax compression due to House Bill 3, right? So that Tier 1 portion varies from district to district. I think for this next year, it's 80-46, somewhere around there. The first 80-46 pennies of your tax rate are categorized as Tier 1. You can see here that the next 8 pennies above that are Tier 2 Level 1. You guys have adopted 6 pennies in that zone, and then you guys don't have any pennies in the copper penny zone, Tier 2 Level 2. So walking through this again, that Tier 1 is subject to variable rates of compression due to your local property value growth, right? You guys have seen lots of property value growth here in San Marcos, and so you guys are compressed all the way down to the floor. As low of a Tier 1 rate as you guys can possibly get under law, that's what we've seen for y'all this year, again, due to that property value growth. You can levy up to 17 pennies on top of that. Again, you guys have 6 pennies. The first 5 of those can be adopted just by a simple majority of the board. Accessing new pennies above that requires voter approval. The one thing I do want to highlight here with regards to recapture is that for golden pennies, there's no additional recapture obligation that would be generated by adopting additional golden pennies, right? So you guys have 6 golden pennies. You have 2 more under law that you could adopt and not generate any additional recapture obligation there. If you exhausted those in the future and got into the copper penny zone, so essentially pennies 9 through 17, those pennies are subject to recapture, right? So as you adopted those pennies potentially, your bucket, thinking back to that analogy earlier, right? Your bucket would get bigger, but a lot of tax collections would spill out. Right, so for the golden pennies, the way that kind of works with that analogy is your bucket gets bigger and nothing extra spills out, right? You get to keep all of those local funds that are generated by golden pennies, okay? But that's not the case for copper pennies. So as I mentioned earlier, you guys adopted 6 Tier 2 pennies, so you have 6 golden pennies. Again, those don't generate any additional recapture, and you have 11 remaining pennies as under your Tier 2 taxing capacity. Yes?
Yes, okay, so we only have 6 pennies, but in order to get the other 2 pennies, we have to have an election, is that correct?
Correct, yeah. So you can, there's sort of 2 ways to adopt them. The most common way is through an election, and that allows you to adopt them permanently. You can, if there is a disaster declared in your county, you can exercise your authority as a board and adopt those additional pennies temporarily, and they only last 1 year, and they have to be tied to that disaster that occurred in your county.
Very good.
Yeah.
I have a question about that too. So if we haven't, if we have not gone out for voter approval on any of the copper pennies, right? How come we're subject to recapture? Shouldn't those be the only pennies that are subject to recapture?
Right, so I'll get into that here in a little bit,
Okay.
but that's a great segue. There's multiple zones of recapture. So, you know, the analogy I gave was one big bucket, right? Really, there's several different buckets that have different rules that apply to them. You guys are, since you don't have copper pennies, you're not getting any recapture in that area, but you're getting you're seeing recapture under what's called Tier 1, right? The first 0.8046 of your tax rate, right? There's a recapture amount on that tier, and that's where you're seeing the recapture.
And we can't just reduce the tax rate there to get out of recapture?
Not exactly, no. If you do, then...
Not exactly, or we can't?
If you do start reducing your tax rate below 0.8046, then you no longer get 6160 as your basic allotment, and so and you lose all of the tax collections you get from your golden pennies as well. And so, I mean, you could levy down below that rate, but it would come with some pretty severe financial consequences, yeah.
Can I ask
Sure.
one clarifying question as well? Earlier, I believe you said that SMCISD adopted the lowest tax rate for our community that is allowable by Texas law. I just wanted to reiterate and make sure that's clearly understood. Okay.
Right, for the tier 1 portion, you guys have been compressed down to the lowest
Just-
possible rate.
Thank
Yeah.
you. I want to make sure that was clear to everyone.
Yes. Okay, so here's what we're seeing with recapture, and this kind of highlights what I was talking when I was answering Trustee Halsey's question about the various tiers of recapture. Since you guys are just subject to recapture on tier 1, this is really all that's presented on this screen. And so you can see the tax rate that I mentioned earlier. This is just the tier 1 portion of your tax rate. There's the 8046. That's the lowest tier 1 rate allowed under law. And then a couple things I just want to highlight on this slide. You can see the rapidly growing property values there in line 1, right? You can see that your property values in 1 year increased by 1.4 billion. That's pretty substantial, and that's really what's driving the growth in recapture for y'all. And so you can see, let's start with 21-22, line 6. Your gross recapture was $0.03 million, but you had an adjustment of $0.8 million, and I'll get into that what that adjustment means here more in a little bit. But technically, the takeaway here or the takeaway I'd like y'all to have here is, technically y'all were a recapture district last year, but because of this adjustment, it sort of washed it away, right? So you didn't actually have to pay recapture. But due to the rapid increase in values that we see for this next year, that adjustment's not going to be enough to net against for purposes of state funding, and you will have to pay. You will have to make a recapture payment. And then the other thing I want to point out is on line 9, you can see that's essentially the state aid you receive for tier 2 and other revenues. For next year, that's not going to be enough to net against, right? So you can take some of your state aid and essentially forego state aid and bring down your recapture obligation, right? And so last year, this would have been an option because you had so much state aid. But next year, your state aid is going to be, we're projecting around 2.8 million. Your recapture obligation is going to be 5.8 million, right? So that's not enough to net fully against your state aid that we're projecting. So you will, even with that, still have to pay, make a recapture payment for next year, or for this school year, rather. Yes.
Can we clarify? So you stated that the reason that we will be moving into recapture is because of item 1 up here, the increase of over $1 billion in the property values, correct?
Yes.
But it's not quite that simple, right? It's not the fact that we've had $1 billion of growth. It's the fact that we've had $1 billion of property growth that hasn't been equaled out by students moving into the district.
Right. So
right? Because that property growth in large part came from commercial property growth and from non-family housing, right? So that is the growth. If that all goes into the bucket and there's no growth that encompasses student housing that could
Right.
come to our district, then that is how we've outpaced, right?
Right. So the corollary on this table for students is really line 4, the total cost of tier 1, right? That's your bucket essentially for tier 1. So you can see it ticked up a little bit, right? There's been probably some enrollment growth or some growth either at various programs or allotments. And so there's been your bucket got bigger, but just the infusion of local funds really exceeded what y'all could retain under state law.
Right. For instance, like the outlet mall goes into all the tax proceeds from the outlet mall go into the first line item, but no students come in on line 4 from the outlet
Right.
mall.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Kissing tree.
And so state law allows districts to choose from several different options. The first 2 options would be, you are not very particularly attractive. You voluntarily consolidate with another district, voluntarily detach property. Option 3 is by far the most common option selected. I believe as we sit here today, 100% of recapture districts choose option 3, and that essentially just means you cut the state a check, right? Technically, what you're doing is purchasing attendance credits, but realistically, you're just sending money back to the state. I want to circle back, though, real quick to this slide where I pointed out the state aid components of this. So if it were the case, like it was last year, where your line 9 is greater than line 8, right, where your state aid that you get, the aid that you get from the state is greater than the recapture you would have to pay, you could just net your recapture against state aid, right? You could just say, let's say your recapture is only $1 million last year, right? You could say, all right, state, you're going to send me $4.4 million in state aid. My recapture is $1 million. You just hold back $1 million, right, and only send me 3.4, for example. For 22-23, you can see that that's not an option, right, because your recapture obligation is in excess of the state aid that you're going to receive. So you can partially net, right? You can tell the state, we would like to only pay $3 million, right, and net against your recapture payment. But because there's a recapture obligation that remains, you have to dip into local tax dollars to pay that recapture, and that's what's requiring you, the district to make a selection on this slide, essentially, right? Because you have to dip into local funds, you have to choose one of these options.
Can you summarize why our state aid is decreasing?
I think the main reason for that has to do with the formula transition grant. That was a hold harmless that was created by House Bill 3, and I don't want to get too much in the weeds here, but it took a snapshot of your district in 2 years, in 1920 and 2021, and just given sort of the interesting way that the legislature chose to write that hold harmless, it's created kind of a roller coaster effect for the district where the first year of the snapshot you looked really good, and then the second year you didn't look so good, and so it oscillates back and forth through the life of the grant. The grant will expire at the end of the 23-24 school year, so for 23-24 that'll be an up year, right? So it would be reasonable to expect a higher formula transition grant that year. And then that would be, again, the last year of the grant. So just to finish up on this slide real quick, the overwhelming number of districts in the state choose option 3, cut a check to the state. Option 4 is essentially the district choosing to, instead of cutting a check to the state, you can cut a check to another district, one that is not a recapture district, and send money directly to them. You'd purchase, you'd be contracting to educate non-resident students, but you wouldn't technically be educating those students. It would just be essentially, again, you're purchasing credits and that kind of thing. So that is an option. It would still require an election. And then option 5 is consolidating tax bases with another district. That would, again, require an election. So if no election is called, this is a question we get often from boards who are who have sort of newly found themselves in a recapture situation. The bottom line is, if you guys don't make a selection, the state's going to make one for you, and it's going to be a more painful process than if the district just made a selection and cut the state a check, essentially. The options that the commissioner have are also more limited than what you guys have. He can essentially only order detachment or annexation of property or consolidation, right? And again, just that would be a permanent detachment of property or a permanent consolidation, right? Whereas cutting the state a check, let's say your values come down or your attendance goes up, then that size of that check could vary from year to year, right? But if an election is not called and you don't have the authority to cut that check, and you have to pursue one of these options, these are permanent, right? And so this would be a permanent detachment of property like they would cut out, the mall, let's say, and send that to a non-recapture district. And then that would hurt you on the INS side, right? Because now you can no longer tax that property for purposes of paying off your debt either, right? So that would be a detachment to get you compliant for a recapture, but it would also hurt you on the INS side. And so the consequences of, even if you call the election and your voters don't approve it, are essentially the same, right? The state's going to come in and it will make you compliant with the recapture provisions in state law in either way, through a detachment or annexation or consolidation with another non-recapture district. And so I touched on this a little bit earlier. Can I pay recapture with state aid? You can choose to net your recapture payment against the state aid you receive. You can't do that with the available school fund money that I talked about earlier. Remember, that was the $4.6 million that we're projecting y'all get this school year. Because that's sort of constitutionally guaranteed to school districts, you guys kind of have to receive it. And so you can't use that to sort of net your recapture against, if that makes sense. But you can net against your Tier 2 state aid or your formula transition grant, right? That's the about $1.6 million that I touched on earlier. And I think the last couple slides here talk about the recapture adjustment. And what that is, kind of going back a little bit to School Finance 101 here, is the controller sort of verifies the work that your CAD does each year with the property value study, right? They review the values that your CADs put on the properties within your district and sort of test them for reasonableness, right? Make sure they fall within a certain range. That's what I mean by the state certified property values, okay? So the state looks at that, those values determined by the controller, and then looks at the tax collections that you bring in, that you report to TEA. And then if you are levying, somewhere south of 100% collections as determined, again, by that state property value, then you get sort of downward adjustment on your recapture, okay? So this is sort of a unique thing that is available to recapture districts. I would say for recapture districts, it's a good thing, right? You have this extra security in the system where if for whatever reason there's separation between your collections and what the state, like your actual collections and what the state thinks you should be collecting, if you're a non-recapture district, you're just out that money, right? You just lose out on that state aid. But for recapture districts, you actually get that recapture amount reduced by whatever that delta is between your actual collections and what the state thinks you should be collecting based on your property values. And so, this is kind of in the weeds, but I just want to reiterate that this is the one silver lining, I think, to being a recapture district. That you do have this protection against, having, if you had bad collections one year, let's say you have a big taxpayer that, goes bankrupt or whatever and doesn't pay their taxes, you could see a downward adjustment to your recapture because of that. Also, if you choose in the future to adopt a local optional homestead exemption, right, again, that's optional. The state doesn't fund optional homestead exemptions, but that exemption would bring down your collections, right, and you would get a sort of downward adjustment to your recapture because of that local optional homestead exemption. So in short, those exemptions are a little bit cheaper to implement for recapture districts than for non-recapture districts. So yes.
Is that a local homestead exemption that would be for SMCISD or for the city of San Marcos? How does that work?
So you would adopt it as a board, and it would apply to all the resident homesteads within the district.
Since we already have one local homestead adoption, could we adopt a second one?
Well, so the one that you offer now is the state mandated homestead exemption. That was the one that was just increased with that recent ballot proposition,
Yeah.
right? Up to 40,000. That's you're required to offer that by the state to everyone that owns a home in the district, right? This would be in addition to that, and it's not a dollar amount, it has to be a percentage amount. So you can choose from 0 to 20% what that exemption is, and then I think everyone gets, I want to say like 2,000 to 3,000. There's like a minimum amount that's in statute. I forget exactly. I can follow up with Mike later on and get that to y'all. But it does have to be, the exemption you adopt would be a percentage that ranges from 0 to 20, and then that would be given to homesteads in the
Do we
district.
need an election for that, or the board can do it?
The board can do it. It has to be done before July 1, so you couldn't do it for this year, but you could do it next time you adopt your tax rate, next summer. And just to be clear, so this recapture adjustment is tier 1, right? It would only impact tier 1. For those 6 golden pennies you have, you would feel a negative financial impact from a local optional homestead exemption, but this recapture adjustment would cover you for the first, 80 cents of your tax rate essentially, and then you wouldn't feel any real negative financial, budgetary impact from the state. Oh, geez. But you would for those 6 pennies. Okay. And then this just kind of shows how that recapture, I think this is my last slide, so you're almost done with me. This just kind of shows how that recapture adjustment works. And so that middle column is sort of what we're projecting based on your normal tax collections, right? So you can see your gross recapture really was 6.6 million, right? The amount of funding that spilled out of your bucket, right, was 6.6 million. You got a $0.8 million offset due to your collections, and so that brought it down to 5.8. Let's say your tier 1 collections, though, is $2.5 million less than what I have in that middle column, right? Let's say it's 67 million. Again, this is just tier 1 collections. You can see that your net recapture amount is reduced by the amount that your tier 1 collections goes down, right? So if your collections are bad for whatever reason, you get a reduction in your recapture. And so that's at a high level kind of how that how an impact of the potentially bad collections or local optional homestead exemption or whatever, that's kind of how that would play out with regards to your recapture obligation. Yes?
So then I have a question going back to the what are our options page, and option number 2 in the detaching of property. So can the district decide, for say that we wanted to detach the outlet mall, can we draw those boundaries and vote on the board that we want to detach that property?
You could. Again, that would hurt you on the INS side as well, right? So if you did do that, then you're servicing that same level of debt for your all of your taxpayers that stayed within the district would become a greater burden, right? Because you wouldn't be able to use that value from the outlet mall to help pay for that as well. But yes, there are provisions in state law that would allow you to pursue that option.
And we can do that without an election?
The option 2, I don't believe requires an election.
Okay, and then if there are students inside the property that we detached, where would those students be educated?
So I don't know if any district has actually chosen option 2, so there's not a whole lot of precedent to really speak to. I do know there's been a couple games of chicken that have been played over the years between districts and the state with regards to complying with recapture. And so like Houston ISD was the most recent one, I think back in 2015, I believe. And the way detachment works in that kind of scenario is they first look at the big commercial parcels, right, or mineral parcels where there are no students. That would be detached first. And so I'm not totally sure. I think if it is voluntary, you guys may have a little bit more, I guess, ability to choose which parcels. But I do know if it is like the state's coming in and taking away property, they would start with commercial. Actually, I think under state law, I don't think they can even detach residential parcels. And so then if that were the case, that district, like Leander, for example, they have to do an election to authorize option 3 as well. They're doing that this November. But they're largely a bedroom community, right? They don't have a whole lot of commercial or mineral value up there. And so if this election fails, the state is essentially only looking at consolidation at that point, because there's just not enough non-residential value there to pull off and send somewhere else.
Because maybe we are unique, maybe we aren't, I don't know, but we are in a situation where the city of San Marcos has approved development projects inside the SMCISD boundaries that do not yield students to the district, commercial and residential properties that don't have school-age students living in them, while at the same time they have within the city of San Marcos boundaries, but outside of the city of the San Marcos CISD boundaries, allocated housing developments that are family housing, multifamily and single-family housing. So we're in this weird spot where we are getting the revenues from, say, the outlet mall, but we are not getting the revenues that the city is getting from the families that live in 5 Mile Dam. So I think that we might have to think outside of the box and think of some, different solutions, because we're in a very strange situation.
A couple things just to point out about that. So with the additional values, you are getting the benefit of those for those golden pennies. I know that's a smaller portion of your tax rate, right? So you are able to retain locally the tax collections
But
on
our
that
INS
portion.
isn't really a problem. I mean, we've been able to make defeasance payments multiple years, and we've been able to be out in front of that. So that's not really the quandary that we have.
Yeah, it's twofold. It's on the INS side and the golden pennies on your M&O side, right? Those 6 pennies that you adopt, and if you choose to get the
Right.
other 2 at some point, I mean, that's
But whatever choice we choose, we're going to lose them. I mean,
for the golden pennies. No,
whatever
the golden
choice we
pennies,
choose,
you
we're gonna
retain
lose
all of that value locally. Yeah.
So I know that when the state detaches property, it's permanent. If we chose to detach property, would that be something that we could be revisited if it was by choice?
Again, no district to my knowledge has chosen option 2, so it's not something that we're. Yeah, I think I would guess it would probably be unlikely that district that you send that property to would give it up in the future, right? They'd probably enjoy those local tax collections. But that's something I can look into and get back with y'all on. Yes.
In that hypothetical detaching of property and giving to another ISD, does that mean that their boundaries extend, or it's just that value goes there? Like, would they become voters in that ISD then, or they would stay San Marcos ISD eligible participants in all things?
So largely, I think when this has been considered, again, it hasn't been residential properties. So a lot of these questions have never tried to have been answered, right? Because it's just commercial property, right? And so it's my understanding, though, that if it were residential property, they would just be residents of that new school district. That's my understanding.
It would move the boundary of the jurisdiction.
Say that one more time.
It would move the boundary of the jurisdiction.
Yeah. Right. Yes.
Interesting. Thank you.
We can research that more and get back to y'all. But again, this is on something has not really been done by any school district, and so there's a lot of legalese that we'd have to wade through to get y'all a good answer on that. So we can work on that.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
No problem.
Appreciate it. Ready for a quarterly investment report and financial update?
On page 49 of the board book, you can see the beginning of the investment report for our first quarter that ended on September 30th of 22. I want to report within our general fund, our investment earned a little over $255,000. If you look at our debt service side, you can see that within this first quarter, our debt service earned a little over $54,000 in interest. Any questions on that report? Moving on into the financial report, if you look on page 55 in your board book, Ms. Garcia and I wanted to provide some more depth to our financial reports to give you guys, the board, a little bit deeper understanding of our expenditures, right? So if you look on page 55, the corresponding pages behind 55 are a detailed breakdown of each. So looking on if you look at page 56, you'll see the revenue earned in the first quarter of 22 and 23, specific to the account codes, if you will. For example, that $82.1 million of revenue collected on the budget side is in the column of 22-23 revised budget. Same way with that $2.8 million of activity, it is within that middle column of on page 56. On page 57 and 58, you will see both the budget and activity expenditures broken out into a little bit more depth. On page 57, you'll see that those are your functions and the expenditures based on budget based on expenditures, and then also budget based on object code on page 58, taking into account your compensation, contract services, supplies, etc. If you look then on page 59, I know I skipped fund balance, I'll come back, but on 59, that is the report and a detailed report on the budget amendments thus far from the beginning of our fiscal year till present date. Moving back over to the fund balance, again, you can see that our estimated fund balance within this first quarter is approximately $35.1 million, but keep in mind that's unaudited. We are finishing up our audit, and we'll have a solid audited number for the board in next month's presentation for that. Moving on into page 65 and 66, again, this graphic shows our fund balance and cash on hand. On page 65, you can see that's from 21-22 school year, and as it transcends into school year 22-23 or fiscal year 22-23. Any questions, concerns? Thank you.
Questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Operations update.
Okay, good evening, Board President Cantu, Board of Trustees, Superintendent Cardona. This month's operations update, we were asked to do a comparison of the athletic facilities at Miller Middle School and Goodnight. You have the presentations in front of you. What I'd like to do is just address some of the highlights. Just remember that, you know, Goodnight at one time was the high school here in San Marcos. So you're going to see obviously a little bit more square footage. As an example, the gym has a visitor section versus the Miller gym, which only has a home section. Other things I'd like to point out is on the locker room, the square footage for the men and square footage for the women. At Miller Middle School, there's two separate locker rooms, one for athletics and one for PE, where at Goodnight, it's all combined into one. The signage, I wasn't really sure what you're looking for, but I've got some pictures for y'all. And then we took some pictures of the scoreboards. The other interesting note on here is the speakers intercom. There's none at either the gym or the field at Miller Middle School. And Goodnight does have intercom in the gym and on the football field. When we look at athletic participation, those are the numbers. Obviously, the volleyball is a little bit more represented at Miller. Football is a little bit more represented at Goodnight. And obviously, cross country, there's quite a few kids at Miller that run. But overall, there's more athletes at Miller than there is at Goodnight. A lot of that's driven by the cross country program at Miller. That's the picture of the signage, similar signage at both, at the football field. There is a student section sign at Miller Middle School. We've got signage up for handicap. And then when we look at the scoreboards, pretty similar. Miller has a little larger scoreboard than Goodnight. And then when we look at the scoreboards inside the gyms, similar as well. We were also asked to look at maintenance activity. Neither campus had any renovations projects, specifically in the athletic facilities last school year. We did do, so that right there represents a total maintenance projects that were completed from May of 2022 through September of 2022, basically our summer months. There was a lot of painting done at Miller Middle School, a lot of doors, the weight room doors, football field restrooms, doors and jambs are painted. All outside gym doors are painted. The pillars outside the small gym were painted, and then the hallway in between the cafeteria and the large gym was painted. The ceiling tiles were replaced. At Goodnight Middle School, the gym walls, doors, and door jambs were painted. And then both schools had PMIs on their HVAC systems, and all doors and locking mechanisms were checked. That sums up what was done at both athletic facilities at Miller and Goodnight.
Questions, anybody?
I
Ms.
appreciate
Halsey?
this report, thank you. I know that the custodial and maintenance crews have been at Miller this semester getting a lot of the stuff done, and it looks great, and I appreciate that. I have a number of concerns about this that I'll wait, I guess, until the action item for most of them, but one of the things is that it was my understanding when the board decided not to go forward with the renovation and addition project at Miller several years ago that there would be a sort of smaller renovation project that was going to happen at Miller that was going to try to make the facilities at least feel more like part of Rattler Nation, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, and more like the facilities feel at Goodnight. But I don't feel like that's necessarily happened, and I'm not sure why that is.
So these were the alternates. Let me go down. These were the alternates back in 2017. It was the renovations of the gyms. It was renovations of the existing locker rooms. There was a whole athletic addition. And then, of course, with that addition, we'd have the structural pond that would have had to been constructed, all for $4.3 million. That sort of lays out. The new area is right below. Now, the dance room was accomplished. We put a new dance room at the top of 8th grade hallway. So basically, it was a weight room and offices for the athletic. As far as why that didn't, I mean, y'all decided, I guess y'all made the decision not to move forward with these alternates, obviously because of funds. What we were going to do is we were going to get alternate 1A done earlier this year. With the supplemental bond funds, we were talking about getting this done, but then what happened was we had a lot of safety things that we had addressed as a district in light of what's happened in Uvalde. So a couple of months ago, we brought this list to y'all. We gave y'all our recommendation on what was done. We put the budget for you in front of you, and that's sort of where we are right now. The two big projects that aren't being recommended is the renovations of the gyms at Miller and the parking lot at the high school, the resurfacing of the entire parking lot.
So are they not being recommended because these other projects have a more urgent need, you think, because of the safety concerns, but not that you wouldn't want to do them if we had the funds available for them?
We'd love to do them if we had
not having the speakers, the speaker systems and the intercom systems in those gym areas where large students gather, especially outdoors and before school and after school waiting for the buses, is really a big security concern.
We would love to do everything all over the district. It just becomes a matter of funds and what's available. These numbers right here, we're planning to have some money left over. If we can get speakers in the gyms and at the field, we'll certainly do that. I just don't know if we're going to be able to do it within these bond funds, right? Redo the gyms like we want to do. And as far as any kind of additions, that'll have to be a future bond. At least that's.
I mean, we could vote to do it out of general fund because the spaces are not equitable.
Sorry, it doesn't, the spaces seem beyond the need for there's not a huge inequity in the spaces. One gym is larger than the other, but I guess I would argue that I don't see a huge inequity. Is that what your findings are? Is that there is a huge, just looking at the comparison, I didn't.
There is some equity. There is some differences, but once again, we're looking at a campus that at one time was a high school, so they have a little bit more in the facilities or the space
Right,
versus
but
Miller,
my
which was
point
a.
is that it used to be a high school, yes, but it's no longer a high school. It's now a middle school, and actually Goodnight now has fewer students at it than Miller. Miller's outpaced Goodnight in growth, and the facilities are not equitable in terms of student use.
Yeah, so I'm supportive of this exercise, but I would go a step further and say that if you were to visit Miller Middle School today, the main campus is substantially better and more useful than Goodnight's campus and current layout, right? So, I mean, we could definitely, make the campuses equitable in athletics and academics, but we would have to do a significant amount of site work and improvements to the Goodnight campus to make the academic portion comparable to Miller Middle School and what the most recent bond renovated that campus to be. I'm comfortable having this exercise. I'd be very interested in knowing what could possibly be done if we were to pay for this out of fund balance. But second to that, Mr. Sandoval, can you, just because I think it's a substantial withdrawal from fund balance as is, can you explain to us, if this is the appropriate time, the current status of the central administration building?
Yeah, so the RFP closed last Thursday. We had one response come in, one company that responded. We made the decision to extend it. We're going to reissue the RFP. We're going to give them a larger window to respond, and we expect that we'll have something in front of y'all in the January board meeting. But we just felt that with one, we couldn't get a good picture. We couldn't get a good evaluation by just having one respondent. And we had a conference call with the architect today. We talked about it with legal. There's a variety of reasons. Number one, the size of the project. Number two, the contractors that I spoke to, just personnel, staffing. Some of the subcontractors have issue with finding labor. The contractor has issues finding superintendents, or that they're just so busy that they didn't have the time or the resources to put material cost. The other thing I think that might have scared some away is the timeline. We told them we wanted it built in 13 months. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask them to give us a schedule on when they think they can have it completed. Because if we're asking them to have it in 13 months, it's going to cause some issues.
I don't know if there's interest from this board, but, in conversations I've had with Dr. Cardona and you, Mr. Sandoval, was maybe the project just isn't big enough for a firm to allocate resources, like you just said. Is there a way to discuss with them like this being a possible like alternate to that, or like in addition to, like if we were to bid out the supplemental project at Miller connected to the central office and say, like, if you were going to be doing the central office work, this is also a project that we would ask you to service in San Marcos. Does that make this conversation like more attractive to them?
It could.
Is it more
I mean,
work?
It very well could. It's going to be up to them but I don't see why, certainly couldn't hurt. I mean.
I'd be interested in that individually as a board member.
Ms. Mejia?
Mr. Sandoval, thank you so much for providing us with all of these updates. Question for you in regards to the RFP. How many days was it posted for?
So we posted it twice. We posted it on the Sunday newspaper in back-to-back weeks, and then we kept it open for 14 days, 14 to 15 days. We had a pre-construction meeting on site. We had about 6 contractors show up. We got questions from them. We published addendums with questions so that everybody that pulled in the drawings and the plans could see those. But it's about 14 days where we had it open.
I appreciate this report very much. The thing I appreciate most about it is the number of student participants. We've talked a lot on the board about how important extracurricular participation is. So I think this is really valuable data for our director of athletics to see how important, how effective a cross-country teacher, a cross-country coach can be at encouraging participation, things like that. I think that's the kind of thing that's really valuable about this. So thank you for that in particular.
So next month, aside from also, there was a question that Trustee Arredondo had brought up, was the based on the demographer's report, what does the district look like, right? What are we gonna do? So that, I plan to have something for y'all next month regarding that. And then also a comparison of the both campuses, the fine arts program, and David Underwood's gonna help me with that.
Thank you, I appreciate
To take a
that.
look at participants, space, et cetera.
And things offered, yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, my last comment about us initiating this exercise, and I had this conversation with Mr. Sanders, is I know in San Marcos we have had a tradition of offering everything at every campus, right? Like we've said that we're going to have the same art rooms and STEAM rooms and libraries and band halls and choir rooms and all the things. I'm hard pressed to find an ISD who does a similar, we're going to offer everything everywhere and it's going to be depending on where you go. I don't know if there's a conversation, Dr. Cardona, Mr. Sanders, about like specializing programs at certain elementary schools or campuses. Are we going to continue this trend of we are just going to offer everything everywhere and hope that we can staff it to the best of our ability? Can anyone weigh in?
We actually had those conversations as cabinet before. We've talked about that. We talked about what does the district look like? Do we specialize at certain campuses? Do we, that's on the table. That's got to be considered. We talked about Bonham. We talked about the pre-K program at Bonham. There's a lot of stuff that we talked about.
Because I can only speak, I will speak only for District 1, and in like less than half a mile, we have 3 elementary schools, right? And it's my understanding that we offer art, choir, music, all of the things, and that's great and that's awesome. But would we better serve our students if we had specialized curriculum or courses or extracurriculars, because we are still arguably a small community? And would it be cheaper on us when we build new campuses to only build the things that we need versus we're going to try and have everything, right? And so I hope that's a part of this ongoing conversation of facilities and equity. And I understand that currently, like, we offer all of the same things at all of our campuses. Like, we have the same physical space, but I can tell you that some of our like art programs and music programs are significantly better at specific campuses if we're doing like a comparative analysis. So just because we have it doesn't mean it's equitable or you're getting the same programming or that kids are as well served. So like, I'd much rather us have that conversation and say, if you want to have a good music or art program, you go here, because we know that there are disparities and differences in what type of programming you're going to get at our campuses. And so I think it's kind of misleading to say we offer these programs at all of our schools, because although we do, some are significantly better when you compare campus to campus. So thank you.
As a district, we already have specific dual language programs at some of our elementary school campuses. So that's already been started to some extent, right? The dual language program doesn't exist at all elementary schools yet. So there are already precedent within the district for that. But I would argue that we need art and music at all elementary schools. That, just my opinion on that.
Anyone else?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sandoval. Approval of consent agenda items.
Mr. Cantu, I move that the board approve the consent agenda items as presented by staff.
Are you saying both A and B?
The consent agenda items, yes, ma'am. The entire
Do I hear a second?
section.
Second from Ms. Mejia, that we approve both the minutes and the budget amendments. Any questions or discussion? All in favor, raise your hand. 6, opposed, 0. Items for action, Board of Trustees, discussion and possible action on Team of 8 training. This is still on here because we've yet to schedule a time.
Thank you, Ms. Cantu. So I'll just go ahead and jump right in because this was put on the agenda at my request. I was just hoping to get some type of update, follow up, close the loop on, I know this past summer we had discussed having a Team of 8 training with Dr. Ramos, who's I think the current board president or former board president of Fort Worth ISD. But I understand some of my colleagues raised some questions about time commitment, cost, etc., all very relevant and valid concerns. And so if the will of the board is no longer to pursue training with Dr. Ramos, that's fine. I just want us to come to some consensus on then what does our team of 8 training look like? Are we done with it for the year? Are we gonna discuss goals in the future, or?
I want us to discuss goals. At some of the conference sessions I attended, it's supposed to be best practices to look at your goals every year, even if you keep the same goals, at least provide an opportunity for our new board members to have input into our current, core commitments, I'm sorry.
And just as a second comment to that, it was my understanding too that when we had our training earlier this summer, it was our intent to develop a superintendent evaluation instrument that was in alignment with that first exercise. And I know we're agendized for that conversation later. So I'm just wondering, are we gonna do those 2 items together? Are we gonna do the team of 8 separate? Are we gonna talk about the evaluation instrument later this evening outside of the team of 8 training?
I think that's what's happening. That we will be discussing the superintendent's evaluation instrument in executive session as it is on the agenda. Does anyone want to propose a time for a team of 8 training? I know that the information has been sent by Dr. Cardona to all of us regarding the cost.
I haven't received it.
You haven't received it?
I didn't receive the schedule or the budget that I'd requested.
We haven't sent the updated one. It was the original one, I think, that she's referencing, but I reached out to Mr. Ramos, but he was in Jerusalem, so he did his own thing, and then we just haven't reconnected. But what I had sent y'all was initially based on us meeting in August timeline, and had kind of some stuff in it. So I need to get with them to send a more specific calendar.
Until we schedule something, I'm gonna keep putting it on the
But I'm not,
agenda.
I mean, honestly, I'm not gonna reach out to him until the board decides something.
Can
I'm
we,
not gonna waste my time.
for the purposes of tonight, can we table this until we go into executive session to talk about Dr. Cardona's evaluation instrument and see if there's some type of consensus of doing both of those things?
Well, in executive session, we're only scheduled to discuss the evaluation instrument. We can't discuss,
But if we discuss how to craft or implement or
if it's
what that
tied, if
instrument
it's tied
is.
into the evaluation
Yeah.
instrument, it can be discussed in
Okay.
executive session.
Well, then if there's no,
Further comments? Shall we move on then?
well, if we can table this until after the executive session item.
Okay. Consideration possible action on renovation of Miller Middle School facilities.
President Cantu?
Yes, Ms. Halsey?
I'm going to make a motion, but before I do that, I just want to be very clear for the sake of transparency. I do have a student who's a 7th grader at Miller Middle School. My student is involved in the athletics program. However, if this project were undertaken, that's my last student to come through Miller, and I would expect that the timeline for a project, if it were undertaken, would be such that my student would not benefit in any way from said project. So I just want to make that clear. And with that, I'm going to move that we allocate funds from the general fund for approximately $4.3 million to undertake the projects that were not able to be included in the 2017 bond project at Miller Middle School as enumerated on page 76, 1A, 1B, 1C, and 1D.
Can you hold on while we go back and review those?
For the purposes of conversation, I'll second Ms. Halsey's motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we budget 4.3 million to put together the bond projects that were not done yet, that have not been done.
What page was that reference?
Ms. Halsey, what page are those on?
It's on page 76 of the board book.
I'm sorry?
76.
76.
For Mr. Sandoval's presentation. It's revisiting the presentation that was made several years ago. I don't think there's anything that's outside of that original scope here that.
So, yeah, if I can just make this comment, so that 4.3, that was reflected in 2017.
Well, we could allocate 4.3 and then we could send you back to figure out what could be done for that amount of money now.
Okay, so are you saying that price has probably gone up?
It has a little. Ms. Gonzalez,
Okay.
Ms. Garcia, our current fund balance is standing, can you point me to that on the board book right now?
It's a big chunk considering we're gonna go into recapture.
And the 3 months operating expenses? Okay, so that less the 3 months and the already allocated 7 million leaves us. Okay, so we have an unassigned fund balance of about 5.8 and a motion to spend 4.3 of it. Last year, we amended our budget to a total of $8,151,000. $7,018,000 plus dollars of that was for the central office, which means that we amended our budget to the total of about $1,132,000 last year. This year, so far, we've amended our budget to the total in Q1. We've amended our budget $521,300. That's 46% of the amendments we made last year, excluding the central office building. So this change to our,
Why are we excluding the central office building?
just because it's already allocated and because that's how I did the math. So this change would leave us at less than $1 million in the fund balance. Okay, unassigned. And we spent approximately $1 million last year. We've already spent $500,000 in amended items that were not a capital improvement. Okay, just wanted to be clear, make sure everyone understands and we're all on the same page.
And is the recapture amount calculated in this balance? It's not?
That isn't until next fiscal year.
No, I thought it came out of this fiscal year. Doesn't the, mhm. It'll decrease by the amount that he presented.
I just, President Gantu.
Yes.
So obviously I think I've made the case earlier in the evening that I think that the facilities in these terms are inequitable between the two districts, and I think that there are things that we can do to make them better. And I think especially as we see Miller continue to grow, we need to be ready for that capacity. I'm also say that I was approached by several parents and community members who've attended functions at Miller and noticed these discrepancies, and were also dismayed that the board would agree to undertake a building project for over $9 million that benefits only adults in the district, not students directly, that there are no classrooms in that space, while we were not going to undertake the project that will directly benefit students at Miller. So that's all I have to say.
Anyone else? So we have a motion on the floor to move 4.3 from our fund balance for renovation of Miller school facilities. Any further discussion or
For
questions?
the renovation of Miller athletic facilities.
Miller athletic facilities. On the action item, on the item just says Miller Middle School facilities. That's why, that's the way I read it.
I think we can take the question.
Ready for the vote? All in favor, raise your hand. Four. All opposed? Same sign. 4-2. So it passed. that we will allocate 4.3 million for renovation of Miller Middle School facilities. My only reason for not voting for it is that I'm worried about the fund balance. I'm worried about returning money to the state. Because I would like to see both campuses, having worked at a middle school 16 years, I would like both campuses to be equal, but still it's a hard thing when we're looking at our budget and looking at our fund balance.
Ms. Cantu?
Yes.
My concern is that we haven't looked holistically at both campuses. We haven't evaluated any of the other specific kinds of facility inequities. And so specifically allocating the majority of our remaining unallocated funds to this, to athletics only seems hasty. That's my concern.
Sorry, I just want to make sure that we understand that that we did do an evaluation. We actually had a community committee that did, for the 2017 bond, recommended equity improvements, which was what the 2017 bond addressed. And so we did make very broad equity adjustments at every campus, including some at Goodnight. And this was a supplemental one that was recommended at the same time by the committee, but we put it off. And so there certainly, I'm sure, are other inequities, and it would be timely to do another study. But it isn't there. I don't think they're the gaping ones like this one is.
So we haven't done those questions, and we haven't done that evaluation in the last
Since
5 years. So we
2017.
don't
Absolutely,
know
I totally agree.
if they are. So that is an
Absolutely.
assumption. So
I think
without
we
those
could
kinds of
undertake
comparisons,
that.
I think it's hasty.
Mr. Arredondo?
Thank you, Ms. Cantu. I think I'm as surprised as anyone that motion passed, but hey, here we go. Mr. Sandoval, as we move forward, and I've asked this previously, and I know you mentioned it during your operations update, that there's going to be a more deliberative conversation about facilities district-wide. I have no doubt in my mind that this 4.5 million is not going to be enough to accomplish the alternates that were in Ms. Halsey's motion, but I do think it's a good start to have that conversation and moving in that direction. I will again just echo my sentiment of previous meetings that I do think, based on Dr. Salmi's comments and Ms. Halsey's and President Cantu's, that there needs to be a more robust pre-K through 12 assessment of ISD facilities, taking into account not only the lessons that we learned over the pandemic, and that maybe not everybody needs office space or square footage to accomplish their job, and that maybe employees are better situated to be with students in hallways, etc. But similarly, we've seen how career and technical vocational classes are now more important than ever as our economy changes. And so again, as the ISD responds to the lessons learned through the pandemic, what does that look like holistically as an organization across all 13 of our campuses is something that I'd be very interested in. And maybe as we move forward, this money that was approved tonight can be seed money to have that conversation ongoing to ensure that we have equitable facilities and program offerings across all 13 of our campuses across the organization. So thank you.
We've got one more item before we go into executive session again. Human Resources, consider approval of the 2022 to 2023 T-test appraisals. I'll entertain a motion for that.
I move that we approve the T-test appraisal.
I second.
Appraisers.
I'll second.
I had seconds from several places.
Good man.
Okay.
We just get
The
an
motion
explanation
made
of.
by Dr. Sami and seconded by Ms. Villapando. Any discussion or questions? All in favor?
Sorry, before we vote, could we just have an explanation of how the T-test appraisers are selected, please? At the mic, sorry, for people watching at home.
Good evening. Yes, the administrator, the list is comprised of the principals and assistant principals of the campuses. They are the official appraisers for T-test, and we've been using this system, which requires your approval to approve them.
Thank you.
All in favor, please raise your hand. 6-0 opposed. You want to dismiss your people now or after I?
Go ahead.
go into closed session as authorized by Section 551.074 of the Texas Government Code. Discussion regarding superintendent's evaluation instrument and matters related thereto. At 9:46.
It's a sign of depression.
Get my agenda item.
Where are we?
We've had a discussion and have come up with our idea for our superintendent's evaluation instrument. And Ms. Cantu will visit with the superintendent on it. And that's all I have to report from our closed session. Anything else? Okay, I'm entertaining a motion to adjourn.
I second that motion. Oh,
Everybody wants a
everybody
second.
seconded it. I think Ms.
I'll
Mejia
second too.
seconded it.
All in favor, please raise your hand.
Oh.
I made the motion, and who wanted the second?
Who's doing the second?
Mejia.
Mejia, because she never gets to make the motion. Do we need anything in here to sign?
Notes.
Okay.